This is BBC One in the South. Now the news at 10 o'clock with Michael Burke and Heather McCarthy.
The former Europe Minister Keith Vaz has been found guilty of serious misconduct. He faces suspension from the Commons for a month by his fellow MPs. The Rail Union has suspended next week's strikes across the south of England. Diane Blood's having a second child by her husband who died 7 years ago. And the 80-mile-an-hour tea tray that may carry a Britain to the gold medal.
In the south, have the floodgates opened? A legal victory could mean thousands of sewage claims are made against water companies. And her parents say she's one in a million. Now Jade's courage is recognised with a top award.
Good evening. The government career of the former Europe Minister Keith Vaz looks to be at an end tonight after he was found guilty of serious breaches of the MP's Code of Conduct. The Common Standards and Privileges Committee said he should be suspended from the House for a month, a severe punishment that thought certain to be endorsed by MPs. Mr Vaz himself said the penalty was disproportionate and he hoped natural justice would prevail.
Into the Commons after one of the most damning verdicts on any MP, but not a hint of contrition from the man who was once a rising star in Tony Blair's government. Keith Vaz told the media his punishment was disproportionate, the report rushed and unfair.
I think that the process has not been fair, but I accept the process. I made it very clear that I think that the elements of natural justice that I would have expected were not there.
The committee found that Mr Vaz failed in his duty of accountability, refusing to submit himself to the scrutiny appropriate to his office as a member. More seriously still, they objected that he complained to the police that a key witness, Eileen Eggington, had harassed his elderly sick mother in a phone call. The committee concluded this was a reckless and damaging allegation which was not true and could have intimidated Miss Eggington or undermined her credibility. But she was not going to take this lying down. As the former head of Scotland Yard's VIP protection squad, Miss Eggington was not to be bullied.
I was angry about it, but because I was a police officer for many years, I wasn't intimidated, actually, because I knew it to be totally unfounded. I was angry, I would say, more than intimidated.
But what does this say about Tony Blair's judgment? Keen to promote a leading member of the Asian community, he gave Mr Vaz a plum job as Europe Minister, refusing to listen to warning voices. As more and more allegations were made, he gave the Minister his wholehearted backing.
Look, I'm afraid, when the media gets into one of these feeding frenzies, this is what happens. But there's an inquiry that will look at any other allegations that are made, although I have to say, having on the look at the papers that I've seen, I can't see anything wrong.
He did drop Mr Vaz after the election.
I suppose really because the Prime Minister did back him, there will be questions asked as to whether or not now he has anything to say after having backed him before the last election.
Mr Vaz calls this report the rushed last hurrah of the current Parliamentary Commissioner, Elizabeth Filkin. Rushed or not, it is her last investigation. She's been all but sacked by MPs who, like Mr Vaz, feel she was too hard on them, too dogged, too willing to investigate every single complaint. One of their former colleagues says the job should now be made truly independent, not at the mercy of the politicians.
Elizabeth Filkin is one of the outstanding public servants of our time, and MPs, including Keith Vaz, have made it very difficult for her to do her job. She was entitled to cooperation. The rules say that they had to cooperate with her, and so many of them didn't.
Mr Vaz says he's completely innocent, and he'll get a chance to have his say in the Commons next week, but the month's suspension is all but a formality.
Mark Mardell's at Westminster now. That said, where does all this leave the political career of Keith Vaz, Mark?
He says he wants to stay as an MP, and he's got the complete and utter backing of his Leicester Labour Party, so I suppose he'll do that. But Tony Blair did drop him after the election under the pretext of Mr Vaz's ill health, and I think it's absolutely inconceivable that he'd ever be back after today.
Tony Blair did, as you say, back him right up to the election. How much of this is going to rub off on him?
I think it will, particularly because Mr Blair was very clear that his government would have extremely high standards. And we all know accidents happen, but this didn't come out of a clear blue sky. There have been allegations about Mr Vaz for well over 10 years, and I know for a fact that at least a couple of MPs would have said to Mr Blair's inner circle, look, maybe there's nothing in it, maybe there's nothing wrong, but you're taking a risk of having a very embarrassing day one day if you do give him a ministerial job. And you can argue, well, the allegations that have been proved today are nothing to do with those allegations at the time, and maybe Mr Blair was just being terribly fair-minded, giving a chap an even break. But I wouldn't mind betting there's a man somewhere in Africa who rused the day he took that political gamble.
Mark Mardell, thanks. And there'll be more on the Keith Vaz report on Newsnight on BBC Two at 10:30. There's been a breakthrough in the rail dispute that's caused chaos for commuters across the south of England. The rail union, the RMT, has suspended strikes planned for South West trains, pending further talks next week. Well, Rory Kethlen-Jones is at the union's headquarters in central London. Rory.
Michael, the battle between the RMT union and South West Trains appear to be the most bitter in a series of rails disputes which threaten to merge into a national strike. But tonight there's just a sense that one side may have blinked. Waterloo tonight, and relief for commuters expecting days of misery next week. The union battling over pay with South West Trains has just suspended its strikes.
I've just done all my schedule around the train strike, and that's been cancelled, so which means I have an easy week for a change.
I use the South West Trains to get into work, so yeah, it's a total relief that it's actually been called off.
This morning, 400 miles away in Perth, the mood at the headquarters of South West Trains owners was already bullish. The combative boss of Stagecoach, Brian Souter, insists this dispute has been handled by local managers. He said the news from the front line was positive.
We have strong reports coming back that out in the depots, they are holding meetings right at this time, and that these ballots are going strongly in favour of a return to work.
And this evening, the RMT's leader emerged from his headquarters to announce that yes, there would be a pause for talks, and no, this wasn't a retreat.
This is certainly no climb down as far as we're concerned. We've been arguing ever since we were at ACAS that we wished to get into negotiations. We now need to make sure that those negotiations are meaningful as far as our members are concerned.
But the union has been facing a very determined opponent.
Separate the brake pipe, the main reservoir pipe.
Training of managers in the duties of guards was continuing today. South West Trains was confident that within weeks it would be able to run a full service with or without unionised staff. The firm says the 2001 pay deal at the root of this strike won't be altered, but its offer of talks about the future has been enough to bring a ceasefire. Well, one thing that may have weighed on staff's minds was that quite suddenly this afternoon, South West Trains published new rosters, the effect of which would have been that for taking 2 24-hour strikes next week, staff could have lost as much as 4 days' pay. The question must be, having marched their troops back down the hill, will the union be able to march them back up again? The company is certainly now hoping that it will be able to offer perhaps better pay in the future in return for big increases in productivity. The union is just saying it's glad to be back talking to the company. Michael.
Rory, thanks. Tony Blair, who's in West Africa, has called on the world's richest countries to dismantle trade barriers to the continent. Today he went to a cocoa plantation in Ghana to see how workers there were affected by taxes imposed on their products. Our political editor Andrew Marr was with him.
Another day, another West African parliament. This trip is all about convincing people here in Ghana and at home that deeper involvement in Africa is intelligent politics. And Britain has at least one recent success to cheer about.
We showed in Sierra Leone what could be done. But we know that so many people still have their lives blighted by conflict in Africa.
They talk about tribal politics back home. Well, here's the real thing. A king of local chiefs. But behind the smiles, there is real suspicion about whether the West will ever allow Africa fair trade. The heart of Ghana's cocoa plantations, where thousands of farmers survive on less than $1 a day. They harvest the beans, but trade barriers mean the actual chocolate is made in Europe, so Africa loses the profit. Tony Blair says he's on these people's side, but as ever, he was also thinking of voters back home.
It's a win-win situation. When world trade grows, all the evidence is that the prosperity isn't just to those developing countries that are able to take advantage of it, it's also to the wealthier countries too.
In Ghana, they hope he means it. But as one of these farmers told me, we've heard of politicians' promises before.
Some promises have already come good. In Sierra Leone, Tony Blair's next stop, British troops helped halt awful atrocities and stopped a slide to disaster. The Prime Minister assumes that British voters do care about Africa and appreciate his personal involvement. He was always an optimist. Andrew Marr, BBC News, Ghana.
When you use a credit or debit card in the future, you may have to punch in a PIN number rather than sign the receipt. The banking industry wants to make the change because it's worried about card fraud. It's costing £1 million a day. Moving to PIN numbers would cost £1 billion itself, but it would probably cut card fraud by half.
Between us, we own more than 100 million credit and debit cards. And as our penchant for plastic has grown, so has fraud. It's more than quadrupled in the last 6 years. Now the banks are fighting back.
Plastic card fraud is a really serious problem in the UK, and the introduction of chip cards used with a PIN to replace signature whenever you buy something in a supermarket or anywhere is going to make a huge impact on card fraud. We expect that it's going to halve fraud losses in the next few years.
It's organised crime that's become the real problem. In 1995, £85 million was lost to card customers. By 1998, that had risen to £135 million. But last year, the figure rocketed to an incredible £400 million.
You can buy almost anything with a Barclaycard.
Since credit cards were introduced more than 30 years ago, we've well and truly shaken off our suspicion of paying by plastic. But will we be as comfortable with this new initiative, paying by a PIN number instead of a signature?
One day you'll wish you had a Barclaycard.
If it does cut down on fraud, yes, I would be comfortable using it, but who's to say that it will?
I think it's a different opportunity for people to be able to get money, defraud you.
I don't know, it depends. Yeah, if I can remember my PIN number.
Well, there'll be nothing new about this bit. You'll take your shopping to the checkout, which will be swiped through as usual, but this is where it gets a bit unfamiliar. Using new credit and debit cards, which will all be issued with, you just put your card in the machine, type in your 4-digit PIN number, press enter, and that's it. It's a system that's already used successfully on the continent, and like it or not, it's coming to a checkout near you in just 3 years' time. Jenny Scott, BBC News.
The Iranian government's rejected Britain's choice of a new ambassador to the country, setting off a diplomatic row. Several hardline Iranian newspapers had criticised the choice of David Reddaway, claiming he was a Jewish MI6 spy. The Foreign Office says that's not true and has refused to put anyone else forward. It's also downgraded the status of the Iranian ambassador here.
Iran is two countries, the one which wants to build relations with Britain, the Iran which mourned America's dead last September, encouraged by a reforming president, and the other Iran of hardline clerics, a minority still bent on attacking the West, with words or perhaps with missiles if they can. David Reddaway, as Britain's next ambassador, would have tried to break down suspicions. He's ideally qualified, say London, with huge experience and language skills. That all helps explain why the old guard blocked him with a hate campaign. Iranian TV tonight expressed astonishment. Britain won't simply buckle and put forward another name. The Foreign Secretary has already been twice to Iran to build bridges with the progressives fighting all the time for power. Jack Straw accepted tonight they had lost this particular battle.
And we've been led to believe, despite internal difficulties inside the Tehran government, that it would be acceptable. I think it's more to do with quite a long-running saga of internal tensions inside that country.
So did President Bush help destroy Britain's strategy? Jack Straw doesn't accept that, but he didn't like the president lumping Iran with Iraq and North Korea last week as terrorist states.
The United States of America will not permit the world's most dangerous regimes to threaten us with the world's most destructive weapons.
Britain thinks that's far too simplistic and still believes Iran could be brought much closer to the West. So, a reverse for the Foreign Office, yes. A rebuff to both Tony Blair and Jack Straw, yes, that too. But much more important, this rejection of Britain's man for Tehran shows all too clearly that the majority of Iranians who want modernisation and democracy are still at the mercy of the ultra-conservatives, determined to break, not make, ties with the West. James Robbins, BBC News at the Foreign Office.
A man was shot dead after a fierce gun battle on the streets of West London this morning, as police admit that they're struggling to contain rising crime in the capital. Street crime is increasing sharply across Britain. Margaret Gilmore reports on police efforts to bring it down.
This morning's was the 33rd murder in London this year. That's almost one a day. In this latest, a gun battle between two moving cars left one man dead. With street crime spiralling, police here are taking drastic measures. 600 extra officers a day are targeting the problem. In Southwark, a woman's had £200 stolen as she took it out of a cash machine.
As the money's come out, she's waited for it, her hands reached through, snatched the money and just run straight up this alleyway here. We were literally 30 seconds away. So we've got here straight on top of it, but he still managed to decamp away from us.
Within minutes, the victim's in a police car searching for the thief. This is Operation Safer Streets, launched in London this week. Traffic and crime squad officers have been pulled off normal duties to saturate problem areas with police. The figures are particularly bad because crime shot up after September the 11th, when many street patrols were abandoned in favour of anti-terrorist work. This is aggressive targeting of crime hotspots, and the police believe it's already paying dividends. In the first 4 days of Operation Safer Streets, 200 suspects have been arrested across London. There's another reason why street crime is up in most UK cities this year. The criminals want high-tech goods, mobile phones and fancy cars. A top-of-the-range Mercedes was carjacked at this South London roundabout last week. The owner, Gloria Hamilton, was punched unconscious. Carjacking is a relatively new development.
Young criminals seeing an opportunity to force a motorist out of the car and perhaps steal a laptop computer or mobile phone or other valuable goods in the vehicle. And often, as I say, in 80% of the cases, the vehicle's later dumped. In a very few cases, it's organised criminals who target the vehicle and they dispose of that high-value vehicle through their criminal networks.
One more nightmare in the uphill battle against street crime. The real test of London's radical initiative will come when the hundreds of extra officers leave the streets in 2 months' time and return to normal duties. Margaret Gilmore, BBC News, South London.
The key witness in the Damilola Taylor murder trial has denied that she contacted the police for a £50,000 reward. The 14-year-old girl told the defence barrister, Courtney Griffiths, that she wouldn't accept the money even if she was offered it. The jury today was shown tapes of the witness singing "I'm in the money" during a recording of a police interview. 4 teenagers denied the charges. Police say they're treating an explosion at an army training centre in County Londonderry as terrorism. A civilian Ministry of Defence worker is critically injured after picking up what's thought to have been a booby-trap bomb near the centre's perimeter fence. Diane Blood has spoken of her happiness after saying that she's expecting a second child, once again conceived with her late husband's sperm. She first won the right to use it 5 years ago after a long legal battle. Her son Liam was born soon after. Catherine Marston reports.
Delighted to be pregnant again. Using her dead husband's sperm, Diane Blood will soon have a brother or sister for her son Liam.
Are you going to have a brother or sister, darling? Is that good? Well, I actually only told him that she was going to have a brother and sister yesterday because 3-year-olds do have a tendency of telling the whole world.
When Diane's husband Stephen died in 1995, she began a long court battle. She wanted to use his sperm to conceive, but the Human Fertilisation and Embryology Authority refused. Diane eventually won her case on appeal. She was finally allowed to have the IVF treatment abroad, and in December 1998, Liam was born. But the law still doesn't allow Diane to name Stephen as the father of her children.
If the father is registered as unknown on both of their birth certificates, then it's not showing them as full brother and sister, only half brother and sister or brother and brother, whatever it is. And I think it's important that it shows the true facts and the true relationship.
The government says it does intend to change the law to allow a father to be named even if his sperm was used after his death. It will apply to children born from 1991 onwards, but it hasn't happened yet. Diane Blood wants that change before her next baby is born in July. Otherwise, she says, she'll begin another groundbreaking case. Catherine Marston, BBC News, Worksop.
The collapse of Argentina's economy is prompting hundreds of people to try to leave the country. There have been long queues outside embassies, with many Argentinians afraid that they'll have no future unless they get out. Ben Brown in Buenos Aires reports on the shaken confidence of the country's people.
Sometimes it seems everyone in Argentina is trying to leave. People queue up for days at foreign embassies here, desperate for visas, desperate to emigrate. The queues are so long, Argentinians bring deck chairs with them. Even the elderly have had enough of this country's economic meltdown. But mostly it's the youth who are trying to get out, a brain drain that'll only make the crisis here worse.
What's really striking here is that many of those queuing up to emigrate are the young, part of a generation who fear their country faces a future of financial chaos, a generation that Argentina can ill afford to lose.
Some of those now leaving are the children of immigrants. The dream of life in Argentina has turned into a nightmare. Viviana dos Santos told me her grandparents came here from Spain 50 years ago. Now, half a century later, she's going back there.
I think it'll get worse. I hope I'm wrong. I hope I leave and on the news I can see that my country's getting better. But I don't think so. I think it'll get worse.
Those who aren't leaving are protesting. There are demonstrations everywhere and every day. Here it's workers from the law courts breaking the law by blocking off the traffic. They don't care, they say, because they haven't been paid for a month. And here it's farmers who release chickens into the street because they say they can't afford to feed them anymore. Unemployed people nearby just scoop them up, grateful for something to eat. But the loudest protests of all come from savers who can't get their money out of the banks. Listen to the sound of Argentina's anger.
In the streets, all the people don't eat every day. Can't eat because the economical situation is a disaster, a real disaster. A lot of people are without work, without house. The economical situation and the social crisis is terrible.
Eduardo Dualde, Argentina's fifth president since that crisis began, has been meeting armed forces commanders. The nation is in turmoil, but no one's expecting a return to military rule. Still, some recent demonstrations have ended in violence, and the president's warned there's a danger of anarchy. His government's financial rescue package is due to take effect next week, and Argentina is holding its breath. Ben Brown, BBC News, Buenos Aires.
George Bush has arrived in Salt Lake City for the opening ceremony of the Winter Olympics. Athletes from 77 countries are in Utah for the Games. Britain sending its largest ever squad. From there, Daniela Ralph reports.
Around 2,500 athletes will compete here in the Winter Olympics. The opening ceremony is now just a few hours away, and it will be an event full of American patriotism. After 7 years of preparation, the Olympic torch is now in Salt Lake City. Also here is President Bush. His arrival has seen security tightened even further. He'll open the Games, saying the Olympics are a chance to celebrate international peace and cooperation. Alex Coomber is the best chance of a British gold medal. She is world champion in the bob skeleton. She'll race face down at speeds of up to 80 miles an hour on a sled the size of a tea tray. This sport is not for the faint-hearted.
To be honest, on the day, you could have a bit of luck or you could not, and those are the kind of things that will make a difference. So it's just to try to make sure that everything about me is prepared the best I can.
Alan Baxter is in with an outside chance of a podium place in the slalom. Great Britain has never won an Olympic honour in skiing. A medal for Baxter would be a massive boost for the sport.
That's what every kid dreams of, really, I think. It's just unbelievable. It's a huge race, and you're at the top of your sport if you win that.
Number 17 is from Great Britain.
Born in Canada to British parents, Glyn Pedersen is the first ski jumper on the British team since Eddie the Eagle. Training on the Olympic Hill, these games will be good experience for him. A medal, though, is a long way off.
Realistically, for Great Britain, the Games are about building a team for the future. These will be an Olympics where the United States takes centre stage. Daniela Ralph, BBC News, Salt Lake City.
Okay, it's 25 past 10. I'll be back a little later with an update on the day's headlines. But now we join our news teams across the UK.
Good evening, I'm Heather McCarthy, and now the news from the south. Thousands of people whose homes are flooded with sewage could now be entitled to full compensation. It follows a legal victory by one man against Thames Water. The judgment will apply to all water companies, and it could cost them billions of pounds upgrading their sewers. The case is of particular interest to one group of residents in Southsea. Here's our environment correspondent, Jay Andrews.
September 2000 in Southsea. Floodwater and sewage in the streets and the houses. The pumping station had failed, and this was the result. 18 months later, some homes here in Florence Road are still being sorted out. This is, of course, Southern Water territory. But this week's ruling on Thames Water applies to all water companies, and it basically says that even if the company isn't negligent, in certain cases, if it hasn't taken reasonable precautions, it can still be held to account. Some councillors believe the Thames ruling will help.
Now the utility has been privatised and shareholders, they're not responsible just to their shareholders, they're responsible to the public. And the decision by the appeal court is a victory for common sense and for the people of Britain and hopefully Southsea.
Southern Water have always held that the circumstances were exceptional. In this case, torrential, unremitting rain. It says the watchdog body Ofwat agrees compensation isn't warranted. But residents, insurance companies and the City Council are considering a group legal action. Of course, it'll take time and much legal perusal before we know whether the Court of Appeal ruling really affects Portsmouth residents. And Thames Water has indicated it's going to challenge the ruling anyway. But at least in the meantime, it's given individuals who think they've suffered from water companies' negligence some hope and some heart. Jay Andrews, BBC South Today, Portsmouth.
Police have tonight named the pilot who died last night after his plane hit power cables in Hampshire. The accident happened near to the BBC television transmitter at Hannington in the north of the county. The man who died has been named as 66-year-old Joseph Richardson, a retired bus driver from London. Mr. Richardson was en route from Blackpool to Popham Airfield. A man who carjacked a Dorset couple has been jailed for 15 years. Ian McEwen from Newton Abbot in Devon attacked Nicholas and Victoria Fielding from Dorchester last April. He threatened Mrs. Fielding with a syringe which he claimed was filled with the AIDS virus. Her husband was forced to drive to an Exeter supermarket where he handed over £1,000. Taunton Crown Court heard McEwen had carried out a series of similar attacks. Police in Hampshire are investigating 2 armed robberies carried out at post offices. The first incident was at Camden Town Post Office in Gosport, where a man held a knife to a customer's throat but left empty-handed when the alarm was triggered. Later, a man armed with a kitchen knife stole money from the post office in nearby Swanwick. Police are linking the raids to 3 others in the area this month. Teachers and children in Wiltshire have been lobbying education officials today in protest at plans to close 5 middle schools. Demonstrators lined the steps of County Hall as a report recommending closure was presented to the council. The schools affected in Tisbury, Wilton, Mere and Salisbury are the last remaining middle schools in the county, but a 4,000-strong petition has been put together by parents opposed to the closures. Now, a 10-year-old girl from Portsmouth has been awarded the national title Child of Achievement. Jade Kidd has had almost no hearing since birth, and last year an injury meant she lost the sight in her left eye. Freddie Rostand went to meet her.
It makes us feel happy. Jade.
There was a spooky house and there was a spooky ghost. He had a spooky friend, he had a spooky toast.
Oh, isn't that fantastic? We can tell about the pleasure.
1 in a million, her parents call her.
10-year-old Jade Kidd from Portsmouth, born profoundly deaf and blind in one eye after an accident last year. We caught up with her and her two best mates at the Newbridge Junior School in Fratton.
It started when we met each other at reception. We've just got friendlier and friendlier.
That's really good, isn't it? Now, and Jade, I mean, you know, you wouldn't know.
Honestly, what can you say? That's what she's like. Her helper has been with her for 6 years.
She's achieved a vast amount. She's, because of the way she is, her sense of humour is brilliant. Nothing seems to deter her at all. She just seems to get on with everything, and she's just really, really fun.